right. Finally, I have a chance. I've been working on this one for a while. This is a colleague of mine today. So, got to be really nice to her. Grace Tedder, welcome to the Differential.
Thanks for having me.
No
Excited
problem.
to be here.
Yeah. This is so one of my buddies did a small podcast with you a couple months ago, just a quick one-on-one, from AJ. He did the Q&A.
Yeah.
And he called me up right after he did it, and he's like, dude, she should just be the spokesperson for the company. I'm like, that's awesome.
I don't know about that, but it's pretty fun talking with Paul and AJ. So
yeah. So he had a lot of great things to say, and ever since then I was like, you know what? I know I should bring her on. And as I told you, we're shifting this week, and actually over the next couple of weeks we're going to do a big focus on women in construction. And since you have a very heavy role within what we do at EFS, I wanted to bring you on and enlighten some folks.
Sounds great.
Heck yeah. So let's start with you. As far as from St. Louis.
No, actually.
Not from St. Louis.
Not from St. Louis.
Where'd you grow up? Tell me about the younger years.
I grew up in Arkansas, in Jonesboro, in kind of the northeast corner, so like 4 hours south of here.
Okay.
I moved up here for school, and I really like St. Louis a lot, so I've stuck around for the last year or so.
School. Not high school,
College,
WashU, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Washington University. And you did what at that for your major?
I studied biomedical engineering, so a little different than what I'm doing now.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very cool. So wow, that's a different angle.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Okay. Well, that's really cool. So your interest, were your interest always in like renewable, or was it very interested in medical or the middle?
Yeah, well, so I mean, in high school and things like that, I was really enjoyed like, biology, chemistry, that kind of stuff, but I also really like the kind of math, like problem solving side of things. And so engineering sounded like something interesting for school. Got into it, like it's a really interesting degree program, but like a couple like jobs that I had throughout college, I kind of was like, I don't know if I want to be in the medical device industry. It's a really long FDA process, and
yes.
there's cool things about it, but I was just like, right now, I was kind of having some interest shifting more towards like renewables and things like that. Got the chance to work on some projects like through the university with that, so it was like kind of a cool thing to try to transition into, and got to take a couple like courses related to that and dig into it a bit more.
And so here's my question. For those of you who don't know, WashU here in St. Louis is the most prestigious school we have in this town. It's one of the most prestigious colleges in the country. It's, I think, on that lower Ivy level. So it's a great place to attend if you get to go there. It's a privilege.
Most definitely.
And tell me a little bit about the programs they had you work on there. Were they renewable ones?
Yeah, so I took a course that actually there's the person who heads up the Office of Sustainability, always a hard phrase to get out. He started a course that was kind of about the transition to renewables and like grid modernization and basically all these really cool salient topics. And he taught it himself, and basically it was really like based on a lot of like going out to different like site visits, hearing from different folks who are actually working in those kind of fields. And it culminated with a group project where we were kind of working on different angles of partnering with the city of St. Louis to help develop the things they were doing.
Okay.
Look at some of their properties and see what might be good for solar. And we were all kind of learning this as we went, like, very much didn't know what we were doing until we got there. So
I've met the inspectors in St. Louis, and you're like,
yeah,
you're here to inspect this? And they're like, absolutely. And I'm like, of course you are.
Exactly. And that's the next semester that turned into a job where we were continuing that project forward with just a few of us. And we're actually planning a training for the inspection team, but that kind of got washed with COVID.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
I'm not sure, if people have picked that up or if they've been working on different things, but I know Phil, who's the person that was behind that course and everything, has been doing different like project-based things with his students.
Awesome.
So, yeah, very
That's
cool.
great. Yeah,
hands-on opportunity that you don't.
You don't always get that, especially like when I was looking actually, and I deep dove into some stuff because I have not finished my undergrad. I am so close, but I still have some work to do.
Always the last few.
I know. That's a whole nother story, but I have not finished that yet. And I was diving in to look, and I think sustainability was an option at WashU. But it's not anywhere else in this town except for I think maybe Maryville now. There's not many. My other half's brother, he got his electrical engineering down at Missouri State, and I think down there, Missouri S&T, Science and Tech. Yeah. So, but down there, the fun thing was he specialized in the grid side of things, which was really cool. And what he does now for a very huge firm, Burns McDonnell, they're a giant, and he is in the transmission side of things.
Wow.
So all he does is travel to transmission sites and basically look at large scale utility all day.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool, which is great because, as you can imagine, between what we do, I get to bounce ideas off him all the time.
Yeah,
I'm like, hey, I saw this on the print. I don't really, hold on a minute. Shing, right over to you. So very cool. That sounds like that was a heck of an experience. It's definitely a place to cultivate what led you to us. When you came to EFS, explain that. You got this resume. It's like, oh, okay, so yeah, you're here. You have all these great credentials. What pulled you in?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing actually with what we were talking about with me studying biomedical engineering and then kind of transitioning more towards solar and renewables, that actually was kind of a little bit similar to what Paul did. Paul, who's our CEO at EFS, Paul came from a chemistry background and worked at a pharmaceutical company. And so I think that was kind of a bond between us immediately where it was like, we were in this other, world, but we're interested in this thing. So that was kind of neat. But yeah, it was just kind of, it was a exciting job opportunity to work in solar for a company that was here. I didn't know a ton about EFS coming into it, but I'd met a few people and it seemed like kind of a neat fit, but it was also one of those weird things where I was starting during COVID. So I started out remote and that kind of stuff. So it was a little bit more of a process kind of before I got to know everybody, but it's just a really good group of people. Who are just,
and you're getting a chance to dive into newer technologies or really emerging technologies, correct? Like I mean, you guys have LiDAR. I get to see some of the stuff, but I'm obviously not as intimately involved in design as you are. So we're using drone, LiDAR, big 3D tech.
Yeah.
Explain how that experience works.
Yeah. So I do the initial system design kind of on the sales side of things. And a lot of what I work with is this software called Aurora, which we're able to use some of the things that you're mentioning, like LiDAR. And so basically I'm like, say you want to put solar on your house. I'm building a model of your house. Aurora makes it super easy for me to draw that out and then have it in 3D. But I'm also using LiDAR, which is sort of like created through, I'm not going to explain this well, but it's sort of like you're flying a plane over and you're like pinging down and basically creating an elevation map.
Yeah.
And so Aurora has LiDAR built into it for at least, the areas that that are covered by that. And so I can kind of see like how tall are the trees actually there, or like what's the pitch of your roof. And so that helps me to kind of build up those sites and be able to model like what kind of sun you're actually going to see on your roof instead of just like being like, oh yeah, like we'll throw some solar up there. It'll produce something. Like we can be really accurate.
So you can see like if there's a giant tree in my front yard that's blocking my whole roof with this particular technology.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Okay. So one of the things that's kind of neat is one of the things Grace does is like analysis on all these different angles. So it's really cool. I'm going to shoot some links to you guys below so that you guys can take a look at some of the stuff that we do and what LiDAR is. It's really interesting technology. In the period of time I've been in solar, very few companies are using this kind of technology to get ahead of the game for design, which in turn leads to a very happy customer because they get to see it all on the front end.
Truly, yeah.
Okay, so you love that. My question is, when you're not doing that, I've heard rumors. You storm the beachfronts of climate nightmares.
I don't know about that, but I don't know about beachfronts. That sounds nice.
So when I heard about the Keystone trip, I want to hear about that, but tell me a little bit about the activism side of Grace. Like, what do you do? What are you passionate about on that side of things?
Yeah. So I got involved with kind of climate justice work. How long ago was that now? Like 3 years ago, something like that. It was something that I'd always kind of like cared about a lot of these issues, but never really been like super deeply involved. And I was in school at the time, not feeling super like passionate about what I was doing with that. And I was seeing all these reports come out from these international groups of scientists and, the folks who study climate change. And they were like, this is really bad. Like, it's not a future thing. It's right now. Like, we have basically like 10 years to really turn things around, or the effects of climate change are going to be really, really severe. The things we do now do make a difference, but it's there's a lot of urgency. And folks are going to be affected differently, depending on where you are in the globe and what resources you have access to.
So if we're staring down the barrel of like a student, I don't know, you probably see the same propaganda I do. I see 50-50 most of the time. 50% of friends, colleagues, peers, all the way to folks who work for me or have in the past. I get all kinds of mixed breeds, but it's usually about a 50-50 split on how they feel about climate change. With what you've read, which I know is a pretty deep dive, how do you feel about the person who says, it's just political and it's a total gimmick?
I mean, it can be frustrating at times, right? Because you're like, it's literally happening, like, especially within the last couple of years, like, you really see it, like the Pacific Northwest right now and the heat waves and all of that. It's like things that aren't normal. So now it feels like a little bit easier to point to specific things and be like, hey, like, you can say that, but like, these things are happening around us. So I think it's a little bit frustrating, but at the same time, I think that I tend not to focus on that kind of conversation as much, because there's so many people that do like realize it's a problem and they do care about it, but they just don't really know. They don't feel like they can do anything about it as an individual. They don't feel like they can, it feels very overwhelming to them. So I think I prefer to kind of like spend my energy talking to those folks as opposed to trying to convince someone like that they have their mind like very set on this one thing.
I mean, I've seen both sides. It's really hard. And I think it was from, I had John Hickey on here. I think I told you about that. He was wonderful. And he brought up a great point. He was like, and it was I wish I would have been recording, because it sucked to not record this part. Like 2 generations of being told that the only thing you can do is recycle. Like, that's all you've got. Like, you can't do anything else for the climate period at all. No innovation on that level. And he's like, and that, just like every other thing in parenting, he's like, that's passed down. Like, how do I change the environment, mom and dad? Well, you see these plastic bottles. You just don't do anything but recycle these. These get recycled.
That's not very exciting.
And that's as good as it gets. And you're like, man, this is all I can do to help the world. So that's kind of, and he basically, in a very small nutshell, because we didn't have a ton of time to go deep dive into that, which I'm going to eventually. He basically, in a nutshell, said, he's like, hey, that's where it started, and we didn't really fix it until, as humans always do, right till we're right on the brink of disaster. And now everybody's kind of figuring it out. I know I've watched so much on soil and water. Tell me a little bit about your experience, because Keystone's oil. Tell me about that trip.
Yeah, so actually this one's line 3. There's so many pipelines to keep up with now. Keystone was the one that the company just pulled out on, so it's officially dead. Yeah. Okay. And these things, there will be times when they're dead and then they're revived again, but I think Keystone, the company, pulled out and everything. So that was a really exciting win, because people have been fighting that one for a long time. But I've been a little bit involved with the organizing to stop line 3. And that is a pipeline that is going to be carrying, that's under construction right now, is going to be carrying tar sands oil, which is actually some of the most like energy intensive as far as extracting and refining. It burns dirtier than some other forms of oil. It's sort of like you're really reaching into the bottom of the bucket to try to extract stuff out of it. Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, and so that comes from up in Canada, and it's a company called Enbridge that is building this pipeline. And it comes down through Canada, and then the section that's being built right now is through northern Minnesota, and then into Wisconsin a little bit. No kidding.
So it's in our backyard.
Yeah. Wow. So, and it actually crosses the Mississippi, or it's set to cross the Mississippi River twice. So it goes under, our this water supply that we're all downstream of. And so that's kind of Wonderful. A huge issue too, because pipelines are really a matter of of when, not if, on if they're going to spill. So we know that they spill. They're actually they have old pipeline that was like the old line 3, but they're building an expansion now through a completely different corridor without removing that old pipeline, because there were so many problems with it. And so it's sort of like, everyone's like, well, the same thing's going to happen again. Like, this pipeline's just going to get old. You're not going to maintain it. And it's going to pollute our water. And it's going through Anishinaabe lands. Those are the indigenous folks up there, and these are
Right.
actually treaty lands that the U.S. government basically made an agreement with a sovereign nation that like you have the right to hunt and fish and have cultural practices
Keystone
here.
did the same thing, correct? I remember the
Yeah,
North Dakota Sioux, I think, right, or something like that. Or no, what was it? It
That
North
was Dakota Access.
Dakota
yeah,
Access.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
exact same thing where it's like they're like, no, you literally made the highest lava land in the U.S. say that we have access to all this, and this pipeline absolutely endangers that because northern Minnesota has had pipeline spills before, and it's absolutely devastating to the local ecosystem and then the broader.
Oh, so they have had
things,
spills
yeah.
up there.
Mm-hmm. They have. Yeah, there was one that I think was like the largest inland oil spill like in the U.S. history. It was
And
in
why
northern
I
Minnesota.
don't? Yeah, that's so weird because
Yeah,
you don't
it's-
see that.
Yeah.
Like, that's like well hidden,
Exactly.
well
Yeah, I
sheltered
think for a
from U.S.
reason, too.
media. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So this particular company, Enbridge. So what are they? I mean, is it refined fuel? What do you know roughly what are they trying to get out? What's the product at the end of the day?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, like if there's kind of a variety of products or what, but yeah, I think they're just refine. They're going to refine these tar sands down into whatever oil products it is for them. I'm actually not super sure of exactly what their
How long
their
is this
product is.
pipeline? Do you roughly?
I mean, it's coming from Alberta, so that's kind of like the middle of
middle of Canada
like
to
decently far north, all the way to Wisconsin. Yeah, so it's pretty long.
huge. Yeah,
They call it a replacement for the old one, but it's actually like it's much bigger.
of course it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's studies and they're like, this is literally equivalent in emissions to 50 new coal plants. Like it doesn't sound like a lot. And like, I didn't even think about, you need to use a ton of energy to pump that through the pipeline. They would become like one of the top energy users just with that pipeline in the entire state.
Jesus.
Which is just like, I didn't even think about it. You think it's like, oh, it's like water, it just like flows through or whatever. No, like you have to really push that stuff through the pipeline.
Because you're built, something you get out of it like like an Exxon out of the water, you're getting more of a smoother, normal oil. So what you're saying is this is so thick, so dense, the energy they got to use to push it through is just ridiculous.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Unbelievable. And this is under construction. When's it set to finish?
So they have been building as fast as they can, basically.
Of course they are. You can't work all week up there.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's like there's a lot of resistance. So basically, folks fighting Line 3, and it's an indigenous-led resistance. Like they have been for like the last 7 years, challenging in the courts and the regulatory systems. Basically doing everything they can to try to stop it. And then it came to construction time. And there's folks on the ground who are, trying to stop construction by putting their bodies in the path of it. So they're like, public opinion is starting to build against us. Like there's more and more people hearing about Line 3. And so I think part of the construction rush is, one, it's summer. It's like they can construct right now. It's not freezing cold up there. But also they want to get it done because as soon as they get it done, even if that permit's revoked, sometimes people aren't always checking if you're flowing oil through that pipeline. So,
Jesus.
Yeah,
What's the space up there? Is that so? I know, like when they did Dakota, Dakota Access was burial grounds, everything. I mean, they were just trudging through the whole deal.
Yeah.
Is this a similar situation to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of like cultural sites. A big thing for Anishinaabe folks is the wild rice. It's like integral to their culture, some of their creation stories, things like that, as well as a food source. And so it's just this rice that grows in, the bodies of water up there. And there's folks literally watching places that they've always come to like harvest this rice.
Just get torn apart.
Yeah, exactly. So
Unreal.
It's a very similar situation.
What so when you're so you get a phone call, I'm guessing, or an email or something that says, "Hey, this is happening. We need people to step up and do this with us. Fight this ridiculously terrible corporation from ripping apart indigenous lands that were promised to us by the government."
Yeah.
What kind of mobilization does that take, and how does this whole thing take shape?
Mm-hmm. You mean as far as going up
like
north?
when you got to go, like, do you go, is it like you're in a group, the group of friends meet, and then you guys, whoosh, or is this like throw a bag in the car, you get a go bag, and you head up, and you're like, I'm going to be here for 3 days, and you guys are in deep shit. I'm going to make it a nightmare for you.
So I think the second version is more true if you're a little bit closer. We're about 12 hours away here in St. Louis.
Right.
So ours is more the methodical, let's plan this out. But we'd had some friends that we knew from just, organizing and activism kind of stuff in St. Louis who had gone a few months back when it was still pretty cold out, and been involved up there. And so some friends of mine were all kind of like, hey, like, I'm kind of interested in potentially going. Like, let's start talking about it. Somebody grabs another friend, and we have a small group. And we found out that the folks up there were organizing a mass action where they were like, we are going to have a bunch of people come all at this time. We're going to have like, we're going to have, get everyone trained up and we're going to take action together. So we went up there as part of what was called the Treaty People Gathering, with the idea that like, we are all treaty people. We're all kind of under this law of treaties. And we're here to like show up for not, for the treaty rights of Indigenous folks. We're here about climate change. Like, there's kind of this legal basis on why we're all here, and really emphasizing that. So
wow, and that's incredible in itself. So you guys got together, you kind of came up with a plan. Mm-hmm. You go up there to execute this plan. How does that work out? Like, is it met with a lot of resistance? I keep wanting to say Blackwater. Talk about some criminals. Are they up there waiting for you like, oh, no, we're not going to have this shit this weekend. These guys are coming up for treaty nightmare, and then they just send their corporate, thugs into the group. How does this work? Like, when they know you're coming, how does that play out?
Yeah, so you're right in that it was a very, like, publicized event, right? Because they're recruiting all these people to come up. So, I mean, it was interesting, actually. So, at the time, I didn't know, because a lot of things operate on kind of a need-to-know basis, just to keep everybody safe, and so you can focus on what you really need to know. But I didn't actually know there were two actions going on at the same time. There were some folks who were crossing a bridge, which is one of the locations where they're going to drill under the Mississippi River, and actually some people who ended up staying there and kind of occupying that space, like set up a campsite and everything for several days afterwards.
Oh, wow.
A lot of Indigenous women kind of leading that and like, just like holding that space and be like, no,
that's awesome.
This is the river, like water is life, like we're going to be here. So that was going on. And then the other action was a pump station. So where Enbridge is constructing, basically they're having all this power come in to be able to keep pumping those tar sands through the pipe. And
which one were you at? Were you at the bridge or?
I went to the pump station.
You went to the pump station.
Yeah. So, we got there, and pretty much the situation with the workers is like, when they see protesters coming, this has been happening for a while now. They're like, okay, well, we clear out, like, day is done. So, they don't want to mess with it. So there actually wasn't a lot of resistance initially. And it was actually later in the day before there was really much of a police presence there, as they were kind of, they had two things going on.
So that's kind of different. So, and I mean, it's not different. Yeah. It's actually how, I guess it very much works with the corporate side of things. So when they see or they know there's an action, their first action is to call the local municipality and say, hey, we have, credible information that we believe there's going to be some kind of a protest on our drill site or on our build site or whatever it may be, or on our construction work site. The locals come in, I guess, and just kind of keep you guys at bay. Try to, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know exactly how all their communications work, but one thing is that Enbridge has been paying local police forces to basically do this work for them, which, seems pretty wrong, as like, you're like, oh, I'm a taxpayer, like I want, I'm funding this police force, but they're also getting this money from a private company. Like, that seems kind of weird, right? Like,
wow.
So that's been part of the dynamic up there too. So yeah, they show up to.
That's unbelievable. Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
So you guys are fighting them, yeah. So they just it's just like everything else in oil, basically. They'll toss some money at it and see or hope that it goes away.
Right. It's about protecting that private property and all that, even if it's not really their right to do that.
That's unreal.
Yeah.
So you guys have basically X amount of days or months left, I'm guessing, because if they're superseding construction or pressing through it in the summer, they're not going to have very long. What happens if they flip the switch? I mean, if they flip the switch, this thing starts working. What are we talking about with fallout for the Indigenous folks and the folks up there?
Yeah, I mean,
outside of what it could do to us, of course, potentially right here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of things can happen already. There's the destruction that comes from actually building the pipeline. I mean, you're talking everything's clear cut, like people are seeing, like I mentioned, the wild rice beds that they've traditionally gone to kind of suffering as a result of that. And the other day there was actually, while they were constructing, there was some kind of a leak or a spill that folks were noticing into some nearby waters. So there's kind of already these ongoing impacts.
Yeah, there's been, I was going to say, I saw, that might have been Keystone, but it might have also been Dakota, but they had said they had like the pipes were stress fractured or something like that. Pressure, too much pressure. And then it's not a big blowout, like a preventer or something like that happened at sea, like Deepwater Horizon. But it was more like it's still substantial.
Yeah.
Like to the land that much. Because a little to them, and that's the unfortunate thing about, I don't want to say the EPA not keeping a very watchful eye, but they kind of bat an eyelash if it's a small little infraction. They just have a reporting requirement. I remember that when I was in the military. They used to say like, oh, EPA's got to report on, and you're like, oh. So it's still a natural disaster, but it's a small natural disaster that we reported.
Yeah, to folks like at a desk somewhere miles and miles away, it's not a big deal, but for people who are
people who are right there, they're suffering from it.
Yeah. And it's also just this idea of like, it's very violating because Enbridge is coming in and like has no, they claim to have procedures and things to like respect cultural rights and like communications with these folks who have been caretakers of this land for so long, but they don't have like the, informed consent of the people who they're kind of interrupting their land. And it's true also for just like, non-Indigenous folks who are living up there, like they don't necessarily want it either. Like it's kind of coming through and it poses a big risk if something especially big happens. But even just being built up there is like already causing problems.
Yeah, I mean, if this thing were to hit the Mississippi, it would be
absolutely
a huge
devastating.
Yeah,
and there's so many waterways up there, both lakes and rivers, that it's like I'm not intimately familiar with northern Minnesota geography, but like spilling anywhere is gonna flow into something else
downstream.
And, like, there's a lot downstream, and there's so many lakes and rivers up there that there's just so much bad potential for impacts on the land and the water.
So with what you're doing there and what they're doing, what are the odds that this thing's successful? I mean, are we talking?
I mean, I don't know. All like the thing that gives me a lot of hope though is like being there with so many people, and like seeing the people who were then like saw that and were really like, moved by that and wanting to get involved, whether that's doing something remotely, like we target financial institutions that are backing the pipeline and things like that. So there's stuff people can do from anywhere, and there's also so many people that have been going to northern Minnesota to physically be there. So that gives me a lot of hope that like there is still a chance to stop this pipeline. Joe Biden is someone who can pull the trigger on this pipeline at any point because it crosses a U.S. border.
And why hasn't he is the question. Is it so good for the economy?
I mean, that's an interesting question to me too, because there's actually been a lot of question of like the need for the pipeline and a lot of issues with Enbridge saying like, oh yeah, there's this need for the pipeline, but other groups looking at it, setting it being like, but these numbers aren't actually adding up. Like we're not sure that the demonstrated need that you are giving is actually needed. So it seems like kind of an interesting thing, but it feels like Biden, took action on Keystone XL because it was already dead. It didn't take a lot of political capital for him to do that. Whereas Line 3, it's like more of an active stance. And I think he just, for whatever reason, whatever factors, whether it's economic, political, it's a higher risk, perceived risk to him to take a stand on it at this point. And I think people, are putting a lot of pressure so that he has to make a decision, and hopefully it's the right one.
Kind of thing that can sink, and that's the other thing. I guess the politics is it can sink the company. Something like that. I'm guessing a loss where you build 3/4 of a pipeline, and you have a president come in and say, "Nope." What that does to the financials and jobs, I'm sure that's a tough decision. Tougher one than I want to make. That segues into my next question, though, which is, unlike what we talked about earlier, which is the kid who's sitting there going, I guess I can only recycle this plastic bottle. If you're sitting down with someone who's young and impressionable right now, what is your message about ways they can get involved outside of that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I love to tell people, whether they're young or old, is like a lot of times we're told like, oh, the only things you can do are like individual actions like recycling or like turning off the lights. And it's like those things, like those are just a drop in the bucket compared to, the tar sands pumping through this pipeline or, whatever the other, very large factors at play are. And so the big thing is to figure out like, how do we actually challenge those things? And the thing is, you can't do it alone. So I always tell people to get involved with a group because like taking collective power is like one of the only ways that people have really made change in this country. And you see all kinds of social movements like the civil rights movement or like gay rights movement and things like that, that there's actual change that comes out of it, even if it's slow and not immediate. And that was how I kind of got involved with stuff, was being part of a group, being with other people. It's a lot more fun, and it gives you a lot more hope. And then you can do really awesome things like literally stop construction on a pipeline, whether that's for a day or, permanently as the ultimate goal. Like you can't do that by yourself, but when you have a bunch of people and you'll get together and, you're able to make some plans and figure out
for
what
a good cause, get together and work it out. And also, I guess that's something you said that was very interesting a minute ago, was information spread, like being intelligent enough to know that like, yes, you can recycle this bottle, but will be more impactful is to find out what banks are backing a major pipeline and expose how that is.
Yeah,
for lack of a
all
better
take
word,
our money out of
kinda-
that bank,
Exactly.
like-
People might pull their money.
Yeah,
and that might
exactly.
change their feeling towards this particular client who is building this pipeline. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. So I'm going to link a couple of these things. I'm going to link the Enbridge stuff. I'm going to link the Enbridge, right? I did get
Yeah,
that.
Enbridge is the company.
Okay, I'm going to link that. I'm going to link the pipeline. And then I'm going to get some information from Grace on some of the places you guys could potentially go, if that's okay with her, to become involved.
Yeah, definitely.
Hopefully our viewership picks it up and goes, hey, I want to join you on the next one. That type of thing. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're from Arkansas. So let's see. I always end it with like a funny, kind of a funny 3-off questions, weird questions, Let's see. Arkansas state animal.
State animal. I don't even know what kind of state animal we have.
I don't know either.
There was a whole thing where someone thought
Bill
they saw like
Clinton.
an ivory-billed woodpecker. Yeah, it was Bill Clinton is the state animal. That's right. Yeah. There was a whole story though about like someone seeing an ivory-billed woodpecker and they'd like been in danger and they were like, the ivory-billed woodpecker is like not in danger, or they thought it was extinct. And they were like, oh, this like bird is still around. We saw it. And then like years later they were like, we think someone actually like saw a different kind of bird. Like they're still extinct. So I don't know if that's the Arkansas state bird, but that was a big thing as a kid.
If the
was that
EPA is
story.
watching, Grace Tedder has an ivory-billed woodpecker in her basement.
Yeah, I do.
She's holding
the
on
last
to him.
one.
That's right. It's just one. He's still alive. So you moved to St. Louis. So Blues or Cardinals? Neither?
I don't keep up with sports that much.
Not at all?
I mean, I guess
Never been to a game?
I haven't. I've been here for 5 years and I've never been to either. I kept thinking about it. I was going to go to a Blues game and then they won the Stanley Cup and then I was like, all right, well now it's just, so crazy
Now
there.
now it's nuts. That's true.
Yeah, so maybe one day because I've never been to a hockey game. So
You got to
I
go
think
to
I
a Cardinals
think-
game to be a real St. Louisan, at least the first time.
exactly.
And then, trickle
But I
in
want
a
to see a
Blues
hockey
game.
game too. So I think if I had to choose, I'd probably start with a Blues game because I've never seen hockey.
Are you
before,
city
so.
or county?
I'm city. Yeah.
You're city? Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. So you're going to get a taste of the new soccer stadium and stuff too that's coming. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Okay, and then let's see. One last big question that I had, and I wanted to throw this in the middle, and I totally slipped my mind, but I just remembered. Women in construction. That's what this last few episodes I'm doing, and you're one of them. What's your big piece of advice for breaking in? As you know, I'm sure you do know, and at this point anyway, it's difficult. There's not as many of you guys as there should be. Crystal, who was on with me a couple weeks ago, made some fantastic points about how she broke in, and she just showed that she was the detail-oriented expert in the room, and everybody else was like, wow. And she was able to build a company, sell it, and then build another one now. So she's,
awesome.
on fire. What's your advice?
As a 23-year-old in my first real job,
First real gig.
I'm like, I don't know how much advice I have, but I think a big thing for me was just trying to find those ways in which I could get experience. So taking that one class that then led to, a part-time job while I was in school, finding ways that even if it's not exactly what you're trying to do, find something where you can gain a little bit of experience, because that really helps people take more notice of you. So, you know, just finding a little bit of something that you can say, hey, I did this. Like, these are some skills that I got from it. Yeah. And then I think just looking for a place where like you mesh with the people too. And that was
culture's big.
Yeah.
And that was, I was going to say, that was the big thing. Like, I think you're actually one of the better folks versus, you know, some of the older folks who have been in construction, men or women, doesn't matter, is, you know, we're having a hard time. And I say this in the construction space, men or women, trying to find anybody who is interested in the space anymore. It's kind of a, I don't want to say it's a dying space, but it's kind of a dying space. I mean, you go to a university, you're far more likely to find a computer science grad than you are an engineer.
Right. WashU cut their civil engineering program, you know, which is like a lot of construction folks come into that through that pathway. So
that's kind of, and, you know, and I've mentioned this several times, but Klein, which is one of the biggest, we're going to do some tool reviews on Klein here very soon. They are throwing money at the idea of like, we just want to get people interested, and they are running an entire campaign.
Wow.
Not just for men, but women in construction. They want everybody. So getting the opinion of a 23-year-old in college on her first job and choosing construction is an awesome one. Yeah. I really appreciate you coming on finally. It was great to have you and be able to pick your brain a little bit. I'm going to do a follow-up. Are you going back? Are you going to go up there and take your pitchfork?
We'll see. I'd like to go back, but we'll see how many days I can get off work, you know?
Yeah, hey. We give days off for this all day.
Very supportive office for it. I'll say that.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, if you do what we do on a daily basis for the company we do it for, you definitely have to have a little bit of that. So, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, I'm going to put all her information below. Reach out if you got questions. DM, subscribe if you enjoy the show. Thanks for tuning in.